So for my next project, I'm going to be making a rather large bar, and the bar itself is going to be skinned with reclaimed lumber. But the two cabinets, and I'm making them in two sets so that they're portable, are going to be made out of 3/4 inch maple veneer plywood, which will give me a nice sturdy base to put all of that reclaimed material on. So like any of my other projects, the first part of this process is breaking down all of my sheet goods. So each cabinet width ended up being about 40 inches. So the first thing I did was cut all that plywood in half, and then I could cut it down to size. And the sizes of all of the sides and the shelves are in captions. The main dimensions of the bar, the length being 7 feet, is to take up a particular space in the customer's house. But the rest of the dimensions and part of the build, as you will see, is based on the fact that they wanted to fit a mini fridge that they already have into one of the cabinets. So you might notice that the measurements are a little bit off from standard, and that's just because of that refrigerator, and also building the one cabinet, the one compartment was a little different because of that refrigerator. So like a lot of my other builds, this is going to be a faster how to pace video. I have much more in-depth details of building cabinets and other aspects of these builds on my channel. So in order to avoid redundancy, I've started making these a little bit faster without such detailed instructions. So once I have my pieces, I'm putting a 1/2 inch rabbet on the back of the sides of the cabinets, and that will receive my 1/2 inch backer that will go on the back side of the cabinets. So I have that sacrificial fence in place, and I'm cutting that rabbet, and then once I have that on all of my backs, I'll also be putting a rabbet on the top, but just 3 inches in on either side, and those will be the two stretchers that I'm using not only to connect the cabinets on top, but they'll also be how I attach the edge grain style butcher block top to the cabinets. Then I'm putting a bottom dado on all of these pieces, which will be where my bottom shelf is. You could see it's really close to the bottom of the piece. There's only about a 1/2 inch little lip that's left on the bottom. And even though it's quite small, you do want that little lip. This is going on carpet, so it's not as big of a deal, but if it was going on hardwood floor, you don't want an entire flat surface on the bottom. It will lead to the cabinet potentially being wobbly. You want it to sit on just a couple contact points. So then I'm adding a shelf onto these panels. There will be a fixed shelf about 6 inches down from the top, and that's what all the rabbets and the dados look like laid out on my pieces. Then, because all these sides are going to be covered by reclaimed wood, I'm going through and pre-drilling some holes so I know they line up perfectly with all those rabbets and dados, and then I'm going to dry fit all these panels together. So like I said, that bottom panel is very close to the floor, and that is because I wanted to keep the cabinets uniform, and the portion that's getting the refrigerator, the refrigerator itself is fairly tall. It's like, I think, 34 inches. So in order to keep that 36.5 inch height, that bottom panel had to be quite close to the ground. So for the one cabinet, this is pretty much done. I could measure and cut the back after I check my diagonals. For the second cabinet, I'm putting a middle partition in the bottom shelf. That middle partition is going to separate the refrigerator side from the cabinet side. So you could see on my two sides, only one of them has the cutout for that middle shelf. So once I had that middle partition, I could then take some of my scrap ply and cut a new piece for that middle partition. I could then put it in place, square everything up, and then take the measurements for the width of that middle shelf there. And I didn't get video of that, but I pretty much just measured the dado and then marked down where it was going to go. So then this is, once those cabinets are built, I could measure and cut those backers. So this is 1/2 inch birch veneer ply, or maple veneer ply. Sometimes the Lowe's by me sells either or. So this is that maple veneer ply. I'm just cutting it down to size. This was one sheet of that, and then I could put it on the backers. So this is adding that one shelf in for the cabinet that has the refrigerator. I cut it in two pieces because I didn't have enough plywood left to make it one piece, and I would have to buy another, I think they're like $53 sheet of plywood in order to do that. So once you glue it together, you won't even be able to notice. So that's just dry fitting all that into place, and then the stretchers on top are obviously shorter than the other ones. And there's that cabinet there with that big open space of the refrigerator, and I'm just going to tack the backers into place, make sure everything is square, and then I can glue both of these cabinets together. So you can't really see it anywhere in the videos easily, but these cabinets are mocked up on a flat surface. I build up a flat surface in my shop because my shop floor is not flat, and you're going to want to start with a flat surface. Anytime you're building any sort of project, building it on a non-level surface will only lead to complications. And then I just go through the process of gluing these all together, which is fairly easy with those dados and rabbits. They come out pretty square, these carcasses, right off the bat. So adding all that glue and squaring it up, especially with the backer, is pretty easy, and I'll let these set up overnight. So now that I have my cabinets made, I'm going to start work on my face frame, and the rest of the project deals with reclaimed lumber. These are slats off of a pallet. It's some sort of species of pine, but it's rough sawn, which is what the customer wants. They want an overall kind of rustic look to the piece. So I'm using my jointing jig, and there's a link in my description on how to make this jig for your table saw if you don't have a jointer. And I'm jointing one edge. Just a word of caution with pallet wood and reclaimed lumber, it's more dangerous than cutting flat pieces, obviously, on your table saw, and it has a tendency to bind and kind of rock on the twists and cups that are naturally in the wood. But in order to keep the characteristic of the wood, you can't really joint it and plane it as you would regular lumber. So while I'm doing this one side, I'm definitely taking some extra caution to make sure I don't have any problems on the saw, and with that one side jointed, I could start making my face frames. I won't be planing these because, like I said, you want to keep that rustic look to the wood. So these slats weren't too bad. They were all fairly flat, and I'm just, like I said, jointing that one edge, and then I could rip it down to size on my table saw. And I think pretty much all of my rails and stiles were about 1.5 inches, depending on where they were going on the piece. But I cut all the stiles at 1.5 inches, and I will attach them and then go through and attach the rails. So in order to attach these, my method of choice is by making these splines with a router bit, a slot cutting router bit in my router. They're 1/4 inch little grooves I put in there, and then I could cut some spline material out of a 1/4 inch MDF, and then also cut a receiving dado on the back of my face frame and attach it that way. I don't do this all the time because it's definitely a little bit of overbuilding. You could get away with pocket hole screws, materials like that for attaching these. This is more a labor intensive process, but with that reclaimed lumber, which is already somewhat compromised as far as straightness goes, I definitely wanted a bulkier setup for attaching everything. So this is just that 1/4 inch MDF. I'm just that slot cutting bit cuts about 3/8 inch, so I cut these to about 3/4 because I'll be cutting a receiving 3/8 inch groove in all of my face frame material, and then I just have a bunch of slots, and you could see how nicely that material fits into all these pieces. Now those two horizontal rails you'll see later in the video, I don't realize I don't actually need that there until later, and I'll have to fix the mistake of adding those grooves. So I just pop all that material in there, and then I'll measure where to cut those receiving grooves into my pieces. This is just ripping them down to size, and like I said, all these were about 1.5 inches, and with that one straight edge I could rip these fairly easily on my table saw. So with all my pieces cut, I then line this up on the edge of my cabinet and mark where I want that groove, then line that groove up with my 1/4 inch dado stack, and I'm going to rip all these. Now since the groove is cut in the same position on all the pieces, you'll notice that with my face frames it's 1.5 inches stile and rail, but sometimes the overhang is on either side of the cabinet. But since those grooves on the cabinets are all in the same spot, I could easily either mount them flush like you see here, or flip them and mount them flush on the opposite side. And then it's just a process I go through. I cut all those stiles to the same height. I think it ended up being about 35 inches tall, and then I cut those grooves on them and I could place them. So the refrigerator opening, you could see I don't want an overhang of those face frames, so those are flush. But on all the other pieces where I'm going to be putting the detail patterns on the edge, I want an overhang so that everything butts up nicely. And then the two middle cabinets, the overhang is on the opposite side, so the two middle cabinets could butt up nicely as well. So with all those styles in place, I can then start adding on the rails, and the way I'm attaching the face frame to itself is with lap joints. So this is about 3/4 inch material, so I'm putting 3/8 inch deep laps on all of my pieces. So I'll go through and put those laps on the top and bottom of my stiles, which will receive the rails. And I'm doing that on my radial arm saw with the with the blade lifted just a little bit, and then I'll go through, like I said, do that with all my stiles, and then the rails, put it together the same way. And you can see with this wide angle shot, it's just a matter of taking pieces off, cutting them, making marks, cutting them, and attaching the whole thing together. So right about here is where I realize I don't need those middle face frames to cover that shelf. I've been making a lot of drawers recently, and I just kind of assumed in my head that those were going to be drawers and I needed a face frame, but I don't. So I just popped them off and used them in a different spot, and you can see I'll remove the splines and I'll fix that center part and have to add some pieces, you'll see it later in the video, of where I already cut out for that face frame. So then I start adding those rails to the bottoms, and I think I'm actually reusing that piece I miscut, because since the cabinets are the same width, it was simple to just repurpose that piece I don't need on that horizontal, and I just added a middle lap for that middle stile. And the thing I really like about these splines is you have to hammer everything into place. It just makes a nice tight joint even before you glue everything together. So then after I realized I don't need the face frame on those middle shelves, I do need a center partition for that one cabinet. So I measured and cut that. Very similar, I'm going to put laps on the top and bottom of the middle partition, and then laps on my rails. And I kind of kicked the camera as I was walking over to my radial arm saw, and this is now out of frame, but I just cut those laps real quick and reassembled everything. And then I have those middle partitions, because these cabinets, there'll be 4 doors, so if that middle partition is to catch that door. So in order to fix that mistake there, what I did was I cut the spline down so it was flush with the edge of the plywood. I'm going to glue that into the space there, and then I'll just cover that with a veneer, and you won't even notice that it's been cut. So then this is the glue up, and I go through and remove all the splines, add glue to the grooves, reattach the splines, and then put the face frames on top. And the face frames I will sink some brads into just to hold everything in place as it dries. So this was just a matter of removing and reattaching. It was pretty easy to put this all together, and then since the cabinets are square, I don't really have to concern myself too much with making sure the face frame is square. Everything kind of lines up when you're working off of an already square surface. Before everything dries, I do go around and check with a square just to make sure everything's square. And then I will, you can see I clamped these 2 cabinets together so they could dry flush. And then this is just taking some of that scrap pallet wood and filling in those 2 those two miscuts I had on that one cabinet. And then that's where that video is going to end, just with the face frame. The next video is going to be, you could see this is where I'm at, which this piece is just about ready for finish. And that's going to be making those decorative side panels and making the doors for it, as well as a edge grain butcher block top. I haven't started editing that, so I don't know if it's going to be one or two more parts, but that is what will be coming after this.